Hello everybody, welcome to Raw Online. Today I will be talking about problems of facial nerve. So we have to remember that facial nerve functions are one of the most visible nerve functions which a person can see, because when a person has facial nerve palsy, it is exhibited in the face. So a person coming with facial nerve weakness, the first thing everybody asks is what has happened. And there is problem in emoting, there is problem in eating, and also there are a lot of other problems which a person faces with a facial nerve palsy. And in a chronic person with a permanent facial nerve issue, that it is both physically and emotionally scarring. And we have to remember that facial nerve palsy is something which a doctor would be seeing a person, at least one person with facial nerve palsy at some point in time in their practice. And it is also easy to identify the site of lesion of the facial nerve depending on the symptoms exhibited. The facial nerve is unique in its course in that it has got the longest course in a bone for any cranial nerve. So coming to the facial nerve, it exits the pontomedullary junction anterior to the 8th vestibulocochlear nerve. So it curves around the cerebellopontine angle to enter the internal acoustic canal along with the vestibulocochlear nerve and the nervus intermedius. The nervus intermediate lies between the facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear nerve. And after travelling the internal acoustic meatus, it enters the fallopian canal. The fallopian canal is a bony canal which through which the facial nerve passes through the course of its temporal bone. And it is divided into three segments. We have the labyrinthine segment, the tympanic segment, and the vertical segment. The labyrinthine segment is the shortest, starts from at the meatal foramen and ends at the geniculate ganglion. We have the first genu of the facial nerve which angles at 75 degrees. The geniculate ganglion gives out the greater superficial petrosal nerve to supply the parasympathetic fibers and the sensory fibers, and it supplies the lacrimal gland. The tympanic segment is also called as the horizontal part of the facial nerve, and it travels along the superior margin of the oval window in the tympanic cavity, and that's why it's called as the tympanic segment. And it passes between the lateral semicircular canal and the stapes. This is one place where dehiscence of the bony canal is seen very often, and there is no branch of facial nerve which is given in the tympanic segment. Then we have the mastoid or the vertical part of the facial nerve. So you have you can see the three nuclei from which the facial nerve arises. This is the intercourse in the internal acoustic meatus, internal acoustic canal, and the meatal foramen. The facial nerve exits into the labyrinthine segment. This is the geniculate ganglion, where you have the greater superficial petrosal nerve leading into the pterygopalatine ganglion in the pterygopalatine fossa and supplying the lacrimal glands. There is the first genu, and this is the tympanic segment where there are no branches, and then it reaches the vertical part, which is the longest segment, traveling in the mastoid cavity. At the beginning of the vertical segment, we have the nerve to stapedius, and then we have the chorda tympani nerve. The origin of the chorda tympani nerve is variable. It can be in any part of the vertical segment of the facial nerve. The facial nerve exits the temporal bone, the mastoid bone, at the stylomastoid foramen, and it exits the mastoid bone at the anterior margin of the digastric groove. So the next part is the extratemporal segment. So it exits the stylomastoid foramen, hooks around the stylomastoid foramen to enter the parotid gland, and here the facial trunk divides into 5 branches. We have the auriculotemporal, the zygomatic, buccal, mandibular, and cervical. So you have the auriculotemporal branch here, then you have the zygomatic branch, the buccal branch, the mandibular branch, and the cervical branch. These supply the muscles of facial expression and the muscles of mastication. Coming to the functions of the facial nerve, so we have to remember that facial nerve is a mixed nerve which has got secretomotor functions, sensory functions, and also motor functions. So the greater superficial petrosal nerve, which arises from the geniculate ganglion, joins with the deep petrosal nerve to form the nerve to pterygoid canal or the Vidian nerve. These nerve fibers carry the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers to the lacrimal gland. The nervus stapedius is a motor nerve which arises from the vertical part of the facial nerve. We will be talking about a bit more of it in a later slide.